Hello, everyone. I'm Annie Gibbins, and you're listening to Memoirs of Successful Women, the podcast where you get to hear candid conversations with fascinating women from around the globe who share aspects of their business and life journey, how they measure their success, and what they have learnt along the way. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Memoirs of Successful Women. Today, I'm delighted to introduce to you Zoë Routh, who is a sought-after leadership expert, speaker, and author. She works with leaders and teams in various industries to overcome silos and work better together. Her fourth book is called People Stuff: Beyond Personality Problems, an advanced handbook for leadership, which has just won her the Book of the Year and Best Management and HR Book at the Australian Business Book Awards 2020. Welcome to the program, Zoë.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks.
So tell me about what you do. How do you help businesses? What does a leadership expert do in the day-to-day of drilling down into those silos that businesses get themselves in?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. As a leadership expert, I specialize in the people stuff. So that's about culture and communication. And what happens is when leaders and their teams are struggling with those office dynamics, sometimes it's silos, sometimes it's at loggerheads, sometimes it's about people not being accountable or stepping up. Those complex people dynamics, what I do is I help leaders and teams uh, navigate the territory of those dynamics. So I show them frameworks and maps to understand the territory so they can make better informed decisions about how to make it all better. On a day-to-day basis, what does that look like? Well, when I sit down with the leader and their team, we talk about what's going on. Often the place where we start is getting understanding of who's around the table so that they have a map of people reading that they can use so they can understand what makes Joe tick and what makes Susan freak out, and how they can understand each other and support each other better and develop better rapport. And that's a really fun workshop. I love to do that one. And then we would do things like determining what their underarching overarching underpinning values are as individuals, as an organization. So that becomes their compass, for their culture compass of how they navigate their team through the complexity. So that's a little bit of a taster of the kinds of things that I do.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful because I totally agree. After managing lots of businesses over the years, it's all about the people, right? People
Yeah.
often think it's about your product or what you deliver, what you provide to other people. Yes, but it is all underpinned, as you said, by the people, and those personalities. That's right. I know we've got an increase in personality profiling and other things through HR, but at the end of the day, it's actually getting along with people and knowing what drives them, what motivates them, how they engage with each other. So those companies who bring you in, what are they feeling? What are their experiences? What makes them have that moment of, hello, we need help here? What are the sort of scenarios?
All right. So if I think about a couple of different organizations, one of them is a new leadership team, so board and executive, and they needed to work out where we go to from here through the pandemic. So they've navigated the pandemic quite well, and they've figured out, like, we need to take a new direction. There's some big decisions we need to make as a cohort. And so they realized that they needed to work better together as a collective, and they needed to have better understanding of where each of them was coming from so they could make collective decisions that were more informed and had better buy-in with. So we did two things at once. We did their culture compass and their strategy. So that's what their particular challenge was. Another leadership team was growing exponentially. They'd added from a team of 2, they added 4 new people. So it's kind of like a
Pretty
massive
big.
change to the dynamic.
Mhm.
And they needed to figure out basically the pecking order. Like, it sounds really rudimentary, but it was a bit like that. Where do I fit? Who's in charge? How do we make decisions? When people had different jurisdictions or different layers of responsibility, how do they navigate the overlaps? So there was tension there about all of this, and they needed to sit down and have a discussion about what was going on for each of them, how they were all responding to change, and have a better understanding of what would help each of them to work better together. So they did this exercise, which is the do's and don'ts of working with me, the individual, and they shared that, and that was fantastic, because it got to some of the heart of some of the issues. As people said, please don't do this and please do this, and they all sat there going, oh God, have I done that? And there was a bit of an awakening, I guess, of unintended consequences of some of their behaviors.
Yeah.
So that's another example. Another one is it was a council, and they were having some what they felt were really difficult personality conflicts, where there's these couple staff members were really arguing a lot and weren't getting along, and they weren't able to resolve the issues. So that was the starting point. And so what we did, we did a personality profile. It's actually a behavior profiling instrument to give them a people reading map, so they could understand the drivers, etc. So we unpacked a little bit of the emotional intelligence that sits behind some of these presenting behaviors to help them get to know each other a little bit better. So that's usually the starting point. Like, there's a little bit of grit, a little bit of tension, and they want to galvanize the team and have a bit more honest conversation about what's going on.
Fascinating. You mentioned the word pecking order a couple of words before, and that's a fascinating one. Do you find that the conflict happens? Is it more about the personalities, the seniority? Is it about people's roles and positions? You know, when you think of a pecking order, it's like, well, who's the CEO, CFOs, you know, managers, other staff? You know, is it those fractures that happen, or is it actually go, well, I've been here for 20 years, or I've just got a lot of friends in the company? You know, do you see a variety or a mix, or is there certain areas that are the biggest pressure points?
Well, how I translate pecking order is not hierarchy, actually. It is status related, though, and status is not always about hierarchy. It's usually about feeling respected for one's expertise and background. And so, as you said, there might be somebody who's been there for 20 years, same job, but they've got all this experience. And if they feel that's being disregarded or ignored, that can cause an emotional response that's unhelpful. And so pecking order is more about that. You know, what are the buttons that are people's buttons that are being pressed?
Yeah.
And often, if it's a new team, they want to make a contribution. They want to have their experience and expertise recognized and appreciated. And that's way of feeling stable in a work and safe in a workplace team. And so there's a little bit of getting to know each other and appreciating each other's strengths, etc. And it's kind of like a reflexive or a defensive position to deride other people's experience and to elevate your own. And it's just an earlier stage of leadership maturity that people need to navigate through. And once people feel solid about their expertise and where they sit in the organization, they can move on from that. And it becomes more about, how do we get results together? How do we collaborate? How do we move on from each other? But that's sort of basic building block of establishing that everybody's got different expertise. Everyone has an equal share, an equal right to contributing. Then that sort of takes away a lot of the tension.
Yeah.
But they're important conversations to have. And people often don't know what's really pushing their buttons until we lay the map on the table and say, well, these are some of the buttons, and probably this is one of yours.
I think it's wonderful, because it's often the situation in a work environment that you don't have that opportunity. It's like permission to share, permission to get to know each other, because you go straight into your roles and who does what, and then wanting to obviously reach your targets and have performance reviews and appraisals. But we sort of miss that opportunity. And having someone come into a company, I know my board's just had a review, and it's almost like this permission to see it as it is, and see it from different people's perspectives and the value in that, which is really great. I think a lot of people want it. They just don't know how to make it happen.
A facilitator can hold the space for those kind of conversations, because they can ask the innocent question. You know, it's like, why is it that, you know, or this is what I'm seeing about, and you can set the tone and allow all the people at the table to have a say and to regulate the conversation in a way that, if the CEO is doing it, often doesn't necessarily allow for freedom of conversation, because the CEO still has authority. And sometimes that chokes a little bit of the conversation, especially if there's tension there. Yeah. So it's people really do value having a chance to get things swept out from under the carpet and out into the air, so we can actually unpack it. And it's cathartic. This is what I noticed in a lot of teams. It's cathartic to have those issues raised, like difficult because it takes vulnerability to raise them, and you're always afraid of the impact you're going to have when you do raise them. And yet it's so good when you do get that stuff out there and you can start actually resolving it and getting a different understanding of each other and respecting each other more.
Fantastic. So let's talk about you, Zoe. How did you become a leadership expert, being able to have these opportunities to involve yourself in these dynamic companies? What has been your career journey, and how did you end up sort of in this space?
Well, I started off my first real job at the age of 17 as a summer camp counselor. And I really had no idea what I was doing. I'd never really babysat kids. I didn't know anything about it. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to just wing this in some ways. I mean, I soaked up everything I could during staff training. And I'm like, right, okay, well, we'll find out what it means to lead a group of young people and do fun activities. And that was a bit of a starting point, I guess. And before I became a summer camp counselor, I'd been at the summer camp as a kid for years and years. And I fell in love with two things. One was the wilderness, and the second thing was being in groups of people. I just love the intimacy and connection you could have with a small group of people going through and having amazing adventures in wild, beautiful places. And that sustained my interest in people and working in amazing places. That took me from summer camp counseling to leading canoe trips all across Northwest Ontario. I worked at that summer camp for 9 summers. And then that brought me out here to Australia, where I continued that kind of work with Outward Bound, which does personal leadership development in the outdoors. And I worked with them for 9 years. And then started my coaching practice. It was just leadership coaching at the time in 2002. And I did that on the side while I was still at Outward Bound. It's kind of like my first step into entrepreneurial journey was to
side hustle.
Yeah, I guess, it wasn't known as a side hustle back then. It was kind of like, I want to do this thing. And I knew I wanted to do coaching because I'd hired an executive coach myself and had such huge personal transformations. I'm like, this is a really powerful personal development modality. And then I had the awakening of like, I'd love to do this with other people. And then the next step was I want to start up my own coaching business, which are two very different things. Like coaching and a coaching business are two different things. And I knew very little about the coaching business side of things. And that became a long struggle. And after I left Outward Bound and I got a job with the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation, and I was there for 5 years, and I designed and delivered leadership programs to many different industries, including rice and wine and cotton and mining and all the places all over rural and regional Australia, which is amazing. Still doing my coaching business on the side. And then in 2014, threw it all in and went full time in my own practice. And it was like, phew, okay, let's have a serious crack at this.
Yeah.
And so the learning continued exponentially at that point.
Yeah, because it's a huge shift, isn't it? Wow, what an amazing journey. And yes, definitely your niche area has been leadership all the way, and you've definitely followed your passions and skill set, which I just love. But also when you make that big decision to go, okay, now coaching is my business, and you give up the security of the day job and you realize the mammoth requirements of, okay, if I make this really big, how does that look like? What were the biggest challenges at that time?
Well, it actually came earlier. Like I tried twice before to go full time. So one was in 2005. I left Outward Bound, and that first year I just worked my ass off and was getting nowhere. And I also got cancer, and so that was like, oh crap. Right, okay, that put a pause on a lot of things, and it was a big physical and emotional turmoil for 6 months. And then I rebooted my practice and went back to Outward Bound part-time for a little while to help sustain me because I had no business after 6 months.
Yeah.
And stayed with them again for another year, and then went back. All right, I'll have another go. So from 2006 to 2008, struggled my way through trying to make a business work and didn't. And that's when I went to work at the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation. And there's so many times where I just wanted to like, I'll just, forget my coaching business and my leadership business and just forget it. And then every time when I was about to press delete on it, something within me said, no, don't do it. Don't do it. I'm like, okay. So I kind of just kept feeding it a little bit. And
Mm,
then finally went, right, okay, it's time to give this sucker a real crack. And so in 2014, I knew that I needed to level up. And one of the first things I did is I booked into a speaking course because amazingly, I managed to get a speaking gig. I'm like, if I'm going to do this professionally, I need to know how to do this well. So I took a speaking course with Matt Church, who is one of Australia's best public speakers, and found out about this other organization he was running called Thought Leaders Business School, which was a community of people like me,
mm.
coaches, experts, consultants, who he was teaching them how to develop their intellectual property and roll it out in a commercially smart way. I'm like, I need both those things. Yeah, I'm like, right. So in 2015, I joined Thought Leaders Business School, A, to get a community, B, to get a framework I knew that worked,
Mm,
and C, to create accountability to actually implement and learn and
mm.
do this stuff. And that's when my business really started to take off. So I would say, it sounds like a very linear thing, but it was up and down. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Kind of like, woohoo, great quarter, and then terrible quarter, and then great quarter, and then 2 bad quarters, like that kind of thing. But the trajectory was upward, which has been amazing. So that did wonders for my leadership practice. And in the first 6 months, I wrote my first book, which was actually quite fast. When I look about it now, I'm like, oh my God, how did I pull that off? But yeah, I pumped out a book in the first 6 months of being in business school, and kept doing all the actions they said to take. So yeah, I followed a system. I had a great community of peers, and that really, really helped. So
Mm.
some of the key insights were about having a structure and a community to lean on was really, really important.
I think it's huge being in that community. And then also that has infectious enthusiasm, I
Mm.
suppose. And it's also that accountability. When you mention accountability, that's true because you put yourself out there and they'll go and say, hey, Zoe, you said you were going to do this. How about, how's that going? And then you can't hide when you can, when you're sort of doing your own thing and go, oh, yeah, it's going okay. Where someone else will, these are power people who will actually, hold you accountable in a really great way, in a positive, supportive way. I love that. And wow, you've been mentored very, very well.
Oh yeah. Yeah. What was really interesting about that community is that they made the money conversation completely transparent.
Yeah.
And so everybody, not only did we talk about the money that we were earning and were aiming to achieve, but we had lanyards that represented how much money we'd made in a quarter in the last 12 months. It was color coded against this white belt to black belt level scheme. So you knew automatically every quarter you had
Yeah.
to look at someone's lanyard, you go like, okay, good quarter, bad quarter, or whatever, or you get a sense of where their practice was at.
Mm.
And what was interesting about that, like, I'd say it was a tug of war, to be honest. Like the idea about accountability and support was there. And sometimes it was, you get uplifted and encouraged by other people's stories, and sometimes completely deflated as the comparison trap activated. It's like, oh, and it's, we're supposed to be inspired by these amazing stories. And sometimes you just feel like, oh shit, I'll never measure up to that. And it can be this confounding thing. And there was a bit of a battle all the time. Like, okay, that's their story, not your story. And every time you have this conversation about why you're not achieving as quickly or as well as them, it's like, that's not helpful. And so it was really a powerful,
Mm.
self-development process to learn how to take control of that inner narrative.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you put yourself in comparison mode, which is when you have a transparent program like that, you do jump to that. And if you let it take over your energy system and your mental conversation, then you are lost.
Yeah.
And so it's important learning to process that and to keep metabolizing all the stuff that comes up for us when we get into those situations.
Exactly.
So that was a really powerful process to experience and to work your way through. And I wouldn't say I've mastered it. That's for sure. I still get, triggers like, oh, so-and-so is doing amazing in that area. And I'm like, oh,
It's like, I'm really happy for you, but oh man, why isn't
that's right.
yeah, and that's normal, isn't it? And that's what we need to realize. It's normal. All that negative self-talk is normal. It's then acknowledging it and not letting it overwhelm and take us under. It's actually going, yeah, I can see what's happening. So where am I at and how can I, you know, make it be a positive rather than a negative?
Oh, it just happened the other day. Went in to do a facilitation gig with a client, and I was telling the client who'd organized me to be there about this podcast interview I did with this amazing woman. She's a NASA scientist and a Zen master. I'm like, wow, isn't that amazing? And she's like,
Right.
oh, great. Oh, I feel really like an underachiever. I'm like, whoa, that was not the intention of sharing this woman's stories to make you feel less than,
I
it's
know.
like her story is amazing. Your story is amazing. Um,
Yeah.
and I think when we're feeling vulnerable and uh, untethered to our own success, then we take those things and we take other people's stories and whip ourselves with them for no good reason. And I
Yeah.
think the practice of honoring our own achievements is something that we need to be really deliberate about. In fact, one of the things I encourage all my leaders to do, and what I do for myself too, is to have a success journal. And every day, as much as I can remember to do it every day, is to write in there two things:
Mm.
process successes and outcome successes. So process successes would be like, wrote a blog today, recorded a podcast interview, things that don't necessarily indicate sales or whatever goal else. It's like progress towards that goal,
Mm.
and celebration of goals along the way. So every day I get a sense that I'm accomplishing something, that I have something worthy to contribute to. And it's fabulous to read back on those now. Like I've got 8 or 9 years worth of those, and to look at what I was noting, that what I was doing on a granular basis every day that has led to where I am now.
Yeah.
And what I celebrated then, it would seem like nothing now, what it was such a big deal back then.
Oh, huge.
And being able to look back on how far you come is as probably more important than looking about how far you want to go, how far you have to go. So capturing that is really important, because we forget, we acclimatize to our current success. And there's always, if we're growth oriented people, and entrepreneurs often are, we can forget that we've grown. We've grown a long bloody way from the
Yeah.
starting point. I just this morning, actually, I pulled out all like they had these placemat things where you could do business planning.
Yeah.
And when I first joined Thought Leaders Business School, there was my first placemat, and just looking at the modest targets I had for myself, the projects I'd started, which felt like these massive mountains back then, because it was all new and never done it before. And it was huge for me then. I like, that's so cute. And it's only been 5 years, I'm like, oh my God.
I
And then you have
know.
to honor past self and honor current self, because current self is creating the amazing next version of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a bit of a soapbox. Thanks
No,
for letting me
I love
rant.
I love that. That's full on beautiful teaching. And we need to absorb that, because like anyone, it's like looking back on an older photo or older anything. You have a bit of a giggle. Or you just kind of go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I was stressed over that. But that's it, because there's always that next thing that you're doing. I mean, it's like if you do a Facebook Live for the first time, it's intimidating. And after you've done 10, you go, oh, like I can just chat away to the screen. Or if you're doing that speaking event, and then suddenly you get polished at it. All of those things, every single step is a big step, is a huge step if you haven't done it before, right? And so it's actually acknowledging, yeah, that's right. Sometimes you go, oh, have I come very far? And then when you reflect back, and I love the journaling, because when you do reflect back and go, oh my gosh, I remember I was intimidated by that. I was scared about that. I did doubt my abilities here or there. And it's so good to reflect back and go, oh my gosh, I've actually gone in leaps and bounds. Because that's right, as an entrepreneur, or you're looking at what's next, and
Yeah,
it's very easy to get distracted by the future wins, and forget celebrating the daily achievements, which are always there when you
that's
look.
right.
Yeah. How do you like to celebrate your wins?
um, I think I like to revel in the feeling of it. So I just won this big award for my book, the
Yeah.
Business Book of the Year, which was so unexpected. And um, when the news came through, I was literally speechless. The most I could get out was shouting out to my husband, like, Rob, Rob. And he's like, what? He came running in. I'm like, I'm showing him the iPad where this announcement is. I'm like, I literally couldn't say anything. I'm like, just pointed at it, like, look. He's like, what did you win? I'm like, I won the big one. I was incoherent. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. So I think really feeling that fully was one of the ways that I celebrated it.
Yeah.
And sharing the news with people I care about was another way. I mean, I'm not one for let's go out for dinner and have a big night. Like, that doesn't feel like celebration to me, but just a simple honoring of the work and of the people who helped create it, and sharing the good news with people who love me and I care about. That that was a lovely celebration for me. And I felt, and I was really, really honored by the support that came back from my friends and colleagues around it. So that was the celebration for me.
Oh, that is huge. And big congratulations. It is huge what you've achieved. So well done you. And I'm glad that you've celebrated a bit. Yeah, and it does take a village, doesn't it? That's behind these achievements. There are the long suffering husbands, or the editors, or the friends who've commented, or the people who've proofread and done all of that. And just those people who believe in you, and that belief takes you a long way. Those people who encourage you and don't get intimidated by you and sort of go, yeah, you go, girl. So how is your fourth book different to your first book? What has been the stages of your books, and how did they play out?
Oh, well, I'll tell you how they're similar is that I put way too much in my first book, and I've put way too much in this fourth book in terms of complexity. I think it's a big, rich book for people to read. So that's where they're the same. How they're different is this latest one, I spent a lot of time researching. I spent a lot of time digging into my thinking around the different principles and ideas behind them. I really worked on my models to flesh out what would be most useful. I really had at the heart of the book thinking about the person reading it, what was going to be useful for them, what were their biggest concerns, how could I help them shift and make a bigger difference in their leadership journey. So I held that as a really strong compass for me throughout the whole book. And this, I guess another thing that was different is that I took a writer's course during the pandemic as I was writing this latest one. And that made a huge difference. So, and that reignited my passion for wordsmithing and wordscraft, and it helped me polish up a lot of the book. So I can reading the book now, I can really tell the chapters I wrote before the writing course and the chapters I wrote after the writing course. And I was like, whoa, I'm not sure the reader would notice that, but I can really feel the difference. And maybe it's just remembering how I felt when I was writing the book. So those are a couple of the key differences. I think, yeah, this latest one is got a lot more depth to it in terms of research and thinking and rigor.
So what will people receive when they buy your latest book? What will they learn from it? Why should they go and buy a Zoë Routh book?
Well, this latest one is about the power of perspective. And the practice of perspective is the Swiss Army knife of leadership. So the more that we can develop our capacity to see long, far, deep, and wide in our leadership practice, the better we are going to be able to handle uncertainty and fluidity and ambiguity. That's exactly what leaders need to be able to do, is to handle that complexity. The other thing that they'll get is some suggestions on how they can see themselves. So this whole crisis of who am I, how am I capable, is resolved a little bit with some suggestions to take on different archetypes and to borrow the strengths and architecture of archetypes. So that can help infuse you with the right energy and the right approach to different situations. And then another big piece of it is a map to understanding people's behavior. So difficult behaviors, I call them the four devils of people stuff. So we talk about the four devils and what drives each of them and how to respond to them, and also to dig below the surface a little bit to change the systems that are potentially creating those four devils in the first place. So it's like immediate solutions as well as long-term solutions. And the skill and practice of perspective is what people can get in their toolbox of people stuff.
Brilliant. I'm sure everyone listening, go and buy Zoe's book, because it sounds super, super awesome. And really, really deep and diverse. I love that breadth that you've put into that. And I think it's wonderful for those emerging leaders who often don't think they're real leaders yet. You know, what you were saying at the beginning of this conversation, where you kind of went, well, I'm starting to lead others, but do I have the skills for this? I'm learning about human behavior, but I haven't really got it all packaged yet. It's so wonderful to get your hands on something from an expert who's been in that field for so long and goes, yes, these are, I've packaged it for you. I'll sort of put it all, not on a platter, but I'll help you go through that journey in a clearer way. I think it's going to be so helpful for people. So where to from now, Zoe? Where do you see your journey going?
I've been looking a lot about this, geez, losing my language, end of the year language loss. I've been thinking a lot about this. So 2021 is going to be the year of Shiva and Shakti. Those are my archetypes I'm embodying for the year. And those are Hindu gods. And
Yeah.
Shiva is the destroyer, Shakti is the creator. And together they need each other to create stuff. So there'll be an element of creative destruction coming into play. So which means letting go of old stuff and creating new stuff. And the theme, I guess, is leverage. So I want to expand what I'm doing in the world with my senior group of leaders, my Amplifiers program, so that can be of service to more leaders around the world. I'm writing another book called Power Stuff, probably is what we're going to call it, Power Stuff. It doesn't sound very powerful. I'm like, I think we'll call it that.
Why not?
I'm just starting to research for that. And the third theme for me for the next year, and which will lead into the next 5 to 10 years, is energy. And so I'm going to be studying, I want to study Aikido to learn a bit of a martial art and the practice of that. So that's a little bit of a taster of 2021 leading into the future. But really it's about more leaders, building more wise and compassionate leaders so they can have a bigger impact is what I'm aiming to achieve.
I'm loving your energy at this time of year. Though you're feeling a few words might be missing, it's like, well, you're certainly not limping home. It's been a really powerful year for you, and you can see. I love the way you've already got you know where you're heading in the new year, and that's big. They are big goals. They're awesome, and I love that focus on scalability. So you're scaling what you do so that you can empower others to have more reach in areas that matter, and I think that is brilliant. So how do people reach out to you, Zoe? How do they find you if they're wanting to find your book or get coached by you?
They can come and find me on my Planet Zoe, which is my website is zoerouth.com, ZOEROUTH, like mouth with an R. And that's like the hub. And apart from that, I'm very active on LinkedIn. Pop into Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. But those are probably the two central places, my website and LinkedIn.
Fantastic. And let's finish our discussion with a little chat about success. So this podcast is called Memoirs of Successful Women. And obviously you are a very successful woman in your own right. But what does it mean to you? How do you define a successful woman or a successful stage in life? What does it look like? What does it feel like to you?
Well, those are two very different questions. What's a successful woman and what's a successful stage in life? Let me respond to it in the way that I've come to learn and think about success. And 20 years ago, when I first hired my own coach, and that was one of the intake questions he had on his coaching form, and which I've adopted and put onto my intake on my coaching forms as well. It's like, how do you define success? And I think at the time I'm like, oh, I don't know, get a promotion, whatever. And it was a pivotal conversation because it led to an exploration of the physical trappings of success, external markers of success, versus the internal markers of success, which is about your emotional state. And at first, for a number of years, I thought, forget the external markers. It's all about the internal state. Success is about how I feel, how I approach the day, all that kind of stuff. And then I've worked out more in the last few years. It's actually both. You need both. You need the tension of having an aspirational goal to create this creative energy for you that you can creatively destroy and progress towards. And that kind of helps you expand who you are and how you are in service to the world. So those external markers are extremely important. And the internal gauges of success about how you're showing up as a human and how much you're enjoying your life in the process and how outwardly focused you are while still learning about yourself is another definition of success. And those two are really important together. If you just have external markers, you're going to burn yourself out. If you just have internal markers, you're never going to do anything. So it's kind of like the yin yang of creativity and participating in the world. So that's my soliloquy on success, if you like. I think what makes a successful woman is really that she owns herself and that she is able to lovingly look at herself and to own all of her flaws as she perceives them, all of who she is, and keep showing up and being a contributing force in the world. So none of us are perfection, and yet we are all perfect. And I think that is a really important aspect of how a successful woman should look at herself. And if people would just achieve all sorts of different things, whether you publish 100 books. Like I was listening to a podcast today and the author's like, oh, I'm not yet 50 and I wanted to write 50 books by the time I'm 50. I'm like, 50 freaking books. I just got out 4. Oh my God. I'm like, wow. And then it's like, well, it's interesting to see, like, is that a goal that's of interest to me? It's like, it just kind of sparks what's possible. And I think if we allow each other to spark what's possible for each other, and honor each other's different journeys, then that is such a delicious place to be, isn't it? It's like, wow, there's just a world of possibilities out there. And what somebody's doing in one world is like, that's amazing. And I get to experience that through your lens on the world. And that's amazing. And whatever I have to offer, people can say that's amazing. They can take whatever's useful from that and help them spark whatever contribution they want to make in the world. This woman I was interviewing, I mentioned her before, Ginny Whitelaw, the NASA scientist and Zen master. Her book, Resonate, is amazing. So I'm currently immersed in it. And it's all about the energy that you bring to the world. We are all of us are all energy, and we either resonate or we don't. There's dead spots within us that we need to clear out and purge that energy out. And that allows us to ring true and to have a sonorous contribution to the world. And how we show up, the stuff that we do, it creates ripples, and that can help other people. And when people get on the same wavelength as us, literally and metaphorically, that can create an amplitude and a wavelength that can create and change the world. And I think that is so cool. So if I'm going to think about success is about becoming more resonant with who you are. So cleaning out your energy channels and your focus and your self-love so that you can become this booming presence that allows other people to resonate and uplift and amplify into the world.
Oh, you have just articulated that so beautifully. I love it. I love it. I love it. You're certainly a woman who's in the flow, and that's it. You can't be all things to all man. You can't be brilliant at everything. And that person who's writing 50 books is also not doing other things. We all have to, it's about knowing where to choose to spend our time and our energy and our focus on what delights us. And for you sound like you've been delighted to get into that learning and research certain topics, and to get, fully immerse yourself in those areas. And that does take time. And there's other areas that you therefore have to let, say, well, they don't matter as much at the moment. And I think that's a really good learning for those who are listening in, that we're all, you're listening to stories of different niches, and how beautiful it is when you're in that niche and you really love it and you pour your heart into it and what the opportunities are. And then, but we're all different, and it's about supporting each other. And wow, I wish you all the best for your future success, Zoë. And I've loved the conversation that we've shared today.
Thank you, Annie. It's been a real pleasure and fun too. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Memoirs of Successful Women. You can find me at anniegibbins.com, where you can download my free resources, get connected on social, and check out my online magic transformation program. If you love this show, feel free to subscribe to future episodes, and of course, share it with your friends. I'll see you again soon, and until then, happy podcasting.